to Mad Marketing TV. My name is Jeff Ogden, the host of the show, and we're so excited about today's guest, Jenn Lim. She is the CEO and Chief Happiness Officer of Delivering Happiness, and she's a Zappos.com consultant. So let's welcome Jenn to the show. Hi, Jenn.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, welcome to the show. It's glad to see you. And like I said, there's some really terrible business news, and what a great day to talk about happiness and delivering happiness. So let's dive into this. Now, one of the things I heard you talk about earlier is how this thing just kind of grew. It wasn't planned. It just started with a book, and then it started with a bus tour, and it just, you got all these reactions from all over the world. So tell us about how this whole delivering happiness idea was born.
Sure. Well, its origins actually started from Zappos.com. So delivering happiness is essentially Zappos' higher purpose, what it stands for, why it does what it does. And so that sort of evolved over the years. Zappos started as an online retailer, and that was its goal as a startup. But as it grew over the years, it kind of matured and realized that they wanted to be more than just a shoe store. So they decided to focus on customer service. And then a couple of years later, they decided to focus on their employees and making them happy first. And then a couple of years after that, the realization is that their greater goal and higher purpose is really just to deliver happiness to the world. So once other companies started looking at how Zappos is applying happiness as a business model, they started getting intrigued and wanted to learn more. So it was at that point that Tony started working on this book called Delivering Happiness and asked me if I want to be a part of the project. And so, of course, I thought that was a great opportunity to do something really cool together. And what we didn't expect is when the book came out, it had an amazing response. We hit bestseller lists and top 10 business book lists, and it was great. And what we didn't realize that, excuse me, a little cold here in San Francisco. What we didn't sort of anticipate was the reaction from not only the business community that wanted to implement these kind of ideas wherever their workplace is, but the non-business community as well. So people were emailing us from all over, like whether they worked in government or in education, or a student, a teacher, or in hospitals, even moms and dads. A mom emailed us and said, I appreciate you writing this book. I'm now going to be the CMP, the chief managing parent of my household. I know I'm a good mom, but I can be better. There is a gentleman who's a trader from New York. He emailed and said, I was actually on the verge of suicide before I read this book, and now I see a glimmer of hope of how I can make changes in my life. All the way to a 14-year-old boy emailed and said, I just started my own business, and I hired my first employee, my 9-year-old sister. So it just spanned. And then what was incredible is we're actually up to our 18th language, and now we're getting all these emails, and we've been in the last couple of years since the book came out, from all over the world. And what was really interesting to us and totally unexpected was that it almost like we witnessed a tipping point in the world of people that not only wanted to talk about these applications of tangible happiness, but actually do something about it. And so that's why when you were saying, it's an unexpected thing, for us it was an organic growth from launching the book, getting this response from all over the world, doing this bus tour. We actually went on a 23-city bus tour, 3.5 months, and getting to know the people and talking to the community and hearing their stories. And so it was just an overall demand that we again did not anticipate of people that wanted happiness in their lives, and that's why we created the company around it called Delivering Happiness, and now have the Delivering Happiness movement.
That's great stuff, and it's really interesting. I read the book Delivering Happiness, and I think it is something that's so fundamental to human nature. Is just everyone wants to be happy, whether it's in their business or their family or their church or whatever it is. It's something
right.
Yeah. Now, one of the things in reading the book, I saw the history of Zappos and how it went through some tough times early and how it evolved, and you just described that. And one of the things that the company developed were the company, the 10 things that represent the company's culture. Things like delivering wow through service, embracing and driving change, create fun and a little weirdness, be adventurous. I'm not going to read them all, but these are the things that are there. Now, what role do those play in both Zappos and delivering happiness?
Sure. So yeah, you're talking about the 10 core values that Zappos developed. And before I go on, I just wanted to sort of preface a little bit more about what happiness, the kind of happiness we talk about, because a lot of times it can be so fluffy, and we don't want to be that at all. Because when we talk about happiness, we're talking about that the body of knowledge called the science of happiness. So the actual data and research that's being done today and is a developing field around happiness and positive psychology, that are things that are data-driven stats and facts that we can actually raise our happiness levels in very tangible and tactical ways. So I just wanted to give a little bit more background to what we say when we say happiness. But going back to the 10 core values, so basically a lot of companies ask, how do you make company culture a top priority? Like, it's such, again, culture, happiness, very intangible things. What are actual ways you can implement that in an organization? So one of the ways that Zappos has done it and now delivering happiness is by instilling these 10 core values. And this is all based on this premise that if you treat your employees right, if you have a strong company culture, then the other things like having great customer service or even being profitable and more productive actually come more naturally. And this is shown as what has happened at Zappos, but it's also interesting that there's all these other studies that have been done in other books like Good to Great by Jim Collins, Tribal Leadership, that actually point to that same direction. And the big message there is that the two things that make companies long-term sustainable are not what you would typically think. It's actually counterintuitive. You would think it's about, margins, how productive, how much you can cut your costs, those things like that, or financial senses. But the two major things to actually make a sustainable business is to have a strong company culture, and the other is to have a higher purpose that your employees can inspire to. So with that in mind, the strong company culture aspect, the 10 core values are what kind of puts that in place. Because basically, it's the 10 things that Zappos and Delivering Happiness hires and fires based on. In fact, the candidates that come in, 50% of their candidacy is based on skill set, but the other 50% is purely on core values. And that continues throughout the lifetime of every employee. And what makes it so important to have those and really stick to them, because at so many companies, I used to be a consultant at KPMG, you see core values like in a plaque on the wall, in the lunchroom or the boardroom, and no one really pays attention to them. But what's incredible is, like, if you have these core values that everyone in the company adheres to and believes that they are their values, and it's very important that it's not just their company core values, but aligns with their personal core values as well. It's incredible that how you can actually grow a company and scale it over time, because at the end of the day, the managers don't need to micromanage their employees, because there's a trust and faith that they'll be making decisions along the way based on these values. And it's incredible how it becomes, a company becomes a breathing organism. We make talk about a metaphor a lot, how we compare a company, a strong company culture in a company, to a flock of birds in the Serengeti. When you see a flock of birds, you see that there's no one real leader. Like once the flock turns a certain direction, there will be another leader, and the leader in the front will probably go in the back, but they're all going in the same direction. And essentially it comes back down to their DNA that enables them to fly that way. And so what we see core values is that's the DNA of a company. And if you have the DNA instilled and everyone believes in it, then everyone can act as one organism and a strong company together.
Yeah, that's good stuff, because I think you're right that most of the times culture, the values are pasted on the wall, and nobody pays attention to them. But if you hire on them, you fire on them, you act out those values, it makes a huge difference. Now, Jenn, you were talking about the science of happiness, and that's one of the things I want to ask you about, because you said that there's research that shows that people really don't know what it takes, what really makes them happy in the long run. Tell us more about the science behind this, if you could.
Sure. So what's interesting is that there's a lot of studies being done, and at the end of the day, there's nothing more basic and simple than this need and desire of happiness. Because if you think about it, if you yourself a question, actually, if you don't mind, could you pull up slide number 2? And this is a question that we ask when Tony and I do our talks at conferences and companies, is that if you ask yourself, what is your goal in life? And no matter who you are, and you ask yourself why enough times, whether it's grow a company or get married, and raise a family, whatever it is, you ask yourself why enough times, it most usually comes back to the same thing, which is happiness. And so how can something such a basic thing, in my mind, be not at this time and day in this modern age so hard to attain? And that's what the research shows, that even though we are physically and physiologically hardwired as human beings to search for happiness in our lives, we're actually really, really bad at predicting what will give us long-term sustainable happiness. So that's where the research in science of happiness comes in, because it shows that through all these different studies, there are ways to actually increase your chances of creating that long-term sustainable happiness. And there's a lot of different frameworks we talk about in the book. If you can go to slide number 6, this is one of the frameworks that we mentioned. And again, so these things on slide 6 are the things that you can actually do in your life to increase your happiness. So at the end of the day, if you have a sense of control of your life, meaning you're free to make your own decisions, an overall sense of freedom that the choices and decisions are affecting your direction in life. If you have a sense of progress, if you keep on continuing in your in development and learning new things. The third aspect is connectedness, and that basically is the breadth and depth of your relationships. And it shows that if you have more of those and you have more meaningful ones, you're actually going to be a happier person. And the last, actually most sustainable form of happiness that any person can have anywhere in the world is to have a vision and purpose and higher meaning. So basically, being a part of something that's bigger than just yourself. And so what's interesting is that if you go by those things, it's just a framework that anyone can apply in their lives, that those things can actually raise your level of happiness. That's what I think is most interesting. Because another study that I like to talk about, and this one points back to slide 5, it's the elements of happiness. And what this basically means is, what are the things within your person, your constitute, that makes up your happiness? And so it comes down to 50% of that is nurture, which is basically your genetics. 10% of that is your nature, which is your environment and your surroundings around you. But a whole 40% of that is your control, your decisions. So if you look at it that way, the 50% and the 10% are things that you cannot control at all, or just to a certain extent. But that 40% is the complete control that you can have, that come out to your day-to-day decisions and your actions. And those are the things that actually bring up your levels of sustainable happiness in the world.
It's great to see the science behind this and how people have control over it. I actually saw something when the lottery was recently so big. They did a profile of people who had won the lottery and found out how incredibly unhappy they were. Because money doesn't really buy happiness, you know. Happiness is something that really doesn't cost anything.
Right.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit. One of the things I think when people look at companies like Zappos and they look at Apple and some of these really successful companies, and they think, it was always that way. But when you read the Steve Jobs biography or Delivering Happiness, you realize it wasn't. Let's talk a little bit about perseverance, about going through tough times and sticking it out. What are your thoughts about the importance of perseverance?
Sure. Yeah, that's actually interesting you bring that up, because it's one of the reasons why it was important to Zappos and Tony to write the book Delivering Happiness, is because when the news broke out that Amazon acquired Zappos for, at the time of closing, it was about $1.2 billion. And so people were thinking, wow, what an overnight success Zappos has become. And the truth of the matter, it's not an overnight success at all. And one of the reasons to write the book was to say these were the ups and downs that the company and Tony had to go through to get to that point. And I guess it just goes to show that there really is no overnight successes. If you hear about that, there's probably a backstory to it, and understanding that is huge, because with any endeavor, it doesn't even have to be a company, anything that you're really passionate about and building and creating in the world, there's going to be those ups and downs. And by having that perseverance, I link the perseverance back to by having your firm understanding of what your purpose is in doing whatever you're doing. Because knowing that there's going to be bad times, like you brought up the layoffs at Yahoo, that's a tough time in life. And here I am talking about happiness when clearly there's unhappy people in the world. But with the understanding that there's always going to be those ups and downs, whether you're an entrepreneur or working at a company and suffering from a layoff. I actually personally got laid off after the first .com bust, so I know exactly what that feels like. But knowing, again, going back to what I talked about in the science of happiness and having that higher purpose in life, once you have that, then the lows will be that much more, digestible, even though it's going to be a hard time. So to take an example of an entrepreneur, if you're just going to create a company for the sake of making money, when time comes that things are really tough, are you actually going to persevere just because of money? Usually that's, and the research goes back to show that's not a great motivator. If anything, it detracts from the goal at hand. And going back to someone working in a company, if the whole ideology and purpose is based on making money and getting higher up the ladder and having that status and having that title, once that is taken away from you, which happened to me, it made me realize, that's not why I'm here on earth, and that's why it shouldn't affect me in such an adverse way as it could. And so those are the kind of things that I think when you think about, the tough times that are bound to come in life, no matter what you do, it's the perseverance that's tied to your greater purpose in life and your greater purpose of doing whatever you're doing on a day-to-day basis that will actually help you, get brought and get pulled through those tough times so that you can get back up again.
Jen, I could talk to you for an hour about this stuff, but unfortunately this has to fit on YouTube, but we'll have a few more minutes to talk on the after party portion. But before we go, where do people learn about the concept of delivering happiness and the whole initiative that you're doing?
Sure, yeah, we have our website, deliveringhappiness.com. We're also on Facebook if you just search Delivering Happiness. We have a Twitter account, which is DH Movement, but the best place is to go to deliveringhappiness.com. And part of it is growing the community and growing the movement. The other parts that people find really interesting are our Delivering a Happiness at Work unit, which basically is our team of people that are helping other companies realize happiness as a business model in a similar way that Zappos has done and other really long-standing brands have done successfully as well. And the other part of it is that we just launched our shop. So that, for us, is our way to create our own sustainability as a startup. And so it's really fun producing those products there as well, all in the name to basically increase the level of happiness in the world, which we are essentially doing. And that's our vision, and that's so exciting that at the end of the day, we're actually raising the level of happiness.
That's great stuff. And I guess for people watching this show, they can actually reach out to you guys to do coaching, and they can buy products and all kinds of good stuff. So,
yeah, and I did want to make a free offer to your audience as well. But basically, Zappos has a culture book that I produce every year, and our team does at Delivering Happiness. And so it's a free book that we send to anyone that's interested in taking a look at what Zappos culture is all about. So if you just send me an email at jenn@deliveringhappiness.com, so that's Jenn with 2 N's, JENN @deliveringhappiness.com, and I'll send you a culture book. Just give me your mailing address because it's a physical book.
Great, Jenn. Great stuff. So last question, what do you consider kind of the future of this movement? Where do you want to take it in the future?
Well, my vision is, it's incredible. Just in the last year, we've already established seeds of the movement in 53% of the countries out there. We're in 105 countries already. And to that, that's incredible to think that just in the short year, that's what happened. So my vision is that by increasing our presence, and at the end of the day, it sounds cliche, but happiness is really contagious. And by doing that, by touching more people in workplaces, like I said, we're going to actually increase the levels of happiness in the world, so we're nudging the world to a happier place, essentially.
I want to thank Jenn for being on Mad Marketing TV. I think this has been a fascinating discussion. So why don't you send an email to Jenn with 2 N's at deliveringhappiness.com and get your free culture ebook, and visit deliveringhappiness.com. So till next time on Mad Marketing TV, this is Jeff Ogden, and we'll see you on the next episode of Mad Marketing TV.